if nothing works, we can still replicate what you did in Victoria. But I hope we will find our own solutions here too in Santa Cruz. And let's now continue with the next speaker, Pedro Calaza. He is a part of many different institutions in Galicia. He has developed over 50 projects, and of course, he has focused on, has many published papers, and he will be talking about green infrastructure as a driver of change towards a consilient urbanism. Welcome, Pedro. It's a real pleasure to have you here.
Bueno, muchas gracias. Se escucha bien, ¿no?
Sí. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Well, since John asked if I would be obedient or not, as a good Galician man, I will say it depends. I will not have a presentation, of course. I will try to adapt to it regardless of time. I will be talking about green of parks, green infrastructures, and how green infrastructure as a planning tool, land planning tool, can be a driver for change to have a friendlier urban planning. Let's try and understand this term. And for that, I will use this index that Diego shared, speak about the philosophy, state of the art, and later on I will be speaking about some ideas we could use within this city with this lever of change. For that, in order to achieve it, we will look now at some of the questions that will then, as a consequence, make some doubts appear, and that's key. Now, let's look at the link between biology and philosophy. I believe they are connected. That's the alma mater, that's the core foundation of working with green infrastructure in the urban setting. Aldous Huxley said that having doubts is having two thoughts at the same time. We're here to generate ideas, thoughts, reflections, to try and find the best solution possible for the urban development of Santa Cruz. What's the global situation? Well, we're all aware of it. There are climate problems, social problems, territorial problems, fragmentation, a loss of connectivity, pollution, and amongst many others. And it's all linked at times with a bad management of that territory. So the human being has taken rivers, has polluted them, has overused them, and has destroyed the starting position. In Stockholm, there were 9 limits defined. In 2023, we had already crossed 6 of those 9 boundaries assessed. I won't be talking about the carbon levels at the world level, at the planetary level, but the situation is quite bad. According to the past risk assessment, you can see that the second point are extreme weather events. That's one of the most worrisome risk categories. And if we look further into the future, we can see that 5 are related to those extreme weather events or some sort of environmental issues. We need to have a more holistic approach. That is proof of it. Carlos already mentioned biodiversity. Here is quite a simple graph, but a very direct one. On the upper part, you can see the different temperatures we've had since 1970 up to 2018. It's in the bluer colors are colder temperatures, the red colors are higher temperatures. And also we can see with the green part, the loss of biodiversity. Many people say that biodiversity can be found in the outskirts of cities, but in fact it can also be found within the cities. Here you can see that some of those biodiversity hotspots. So biodiversity is an important resource we need to use with urban planning. Carlos already mentioned there are 3 things in life: health, money, and love. But I believe there is health, health, and health. And that's how the concept One Health came to being, what Carlos just mentioned. This is a part, an intrinsic part of animals, plants, of life, of human beings. So Cecil probably will also be mentioning how important health is, because most of the mortality risk is explained by all these health, or rather sustainability-related issues. According to the United Nations, it's also linked to a bad urban planning. When I was born with two codes: a genetic code, people who are stronger, who are less strong. There's nothing I can do about that. We also have a postal code. This one defines our health, or education, or income. I cannot work with genetics, but I can work on equity, on this postal code, on also this equity relating to sustainability, to all living conditions. This was published in January, and it says that 17% of this can be explained by the environment, and only 2% by genetics. So it's important where we live, with who we live every day, and how we relate to them. So we can see that the postal code is quite important. It might seem a trivial topic, but it's absolutely fundamental. Within our brains, we have neurotransmitters, we have serotonin, we have oxytocin, we have testosterone, and all of these lead to positive emotions. Many of you probably use Facebook, TikTok, all of these social media. What neurotransmitters do I get from TikTok, and what neurotransmitters are activated by looking at a sunset? We can see that TikTok liberates dopamine, but when we look at a sunset, we have dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, and cannabinoids. It might sound a bit weird, but yes, cannabinoids. And here you can see the comparison between scrolling through Instagram or taking a stroll through a park. We need to have spaces, we need to have greeneries around us. This is nothing new. In fact, spatial medicine has already looked at the link between health and nature to try and generate these 10-minute cities that are accessible and green for all. In Europe, for the past 25 years, we have had different rules, directives, pieces of law linked to a better urban planning. And one of them is the strategy on green infrastructure, or the recently approved, it was launched in August, which talks about restoring urban ecosystems, the restoration of low nature, where we have more trees and more canopies around all cities. If there is no connectivity, we have no green infrastructure. We need green spaces that are connected. If not, it won't be green infrastructure.
That is ecological flow. And so all of this is to optimize our ecosystem systems. In July 2021, a plan was approved in Spain that said that the competencies for delimitation, among others, of the green plans is at city council level. So the city councils must be the ones to work with this infrastructure. So this is a macro scale tool. It's 84% of the population live in cities now in Spain. And so this is where the sustainability battle is going to be fought. If we don't win this battle in our cities, we won't have a sustainable future. The problem with cities is that in Spain, at a conceptual level, they are, generally speaking, dedicated to non-agricultural uses. So cities negate nature in a way. There's a real big difference between these cities and nature. Perhaps we need to change our definition of cities and think more about cities as a more natural space. This morning we heard about the difference between traditional urbanism, which is designed in offices with closed walls, but rather today urbanism needs to be done in movement with collaboration. And I would suggest this new concept of consilience or unifying urbanism. Right now, there's a demographic transition taking place. There are places where lots of people are born and die, and there are lots of places where nobody is born and nobody dies, and these two spaces have very different needs. This is contemporary urbanism. So consilience is an idea put forward by William Whewell, a British man in the 18th century. He talks about a post-modern society. Nowadays, people specialize a great deal in their knowledge. But in the past, these humanists had a more overarching vision of things, and that's consilience, this unifying perspective. And Edward Wilson, who is the father of the term biodiversity, in this wonderful book, The Unity of Consilience, and he talks about bringing together knowledge and linking society and nature. So urbanism, as I understand it, in a contemporary way, would be bringing together all of these different concepts that are taken into account when designing cities. So human science is multidisciplinary, that tries to analyze, study, plan, manage, and control cities from a perspective of bringing together knowledge, responding to social challenges, environmental, ecological, among others. This is broken down into different modules and sub-modules and addressed in a very horizontal way, which allows for working with heritage, with healthcare, with new technologies, infrastructure, lighting, etc., etc., etc. So this is an ex novo vision of how we can link our projects together. So NBS means nature-based solutions, and this is describing hybrid solutions. We can link natural solutions to technology to offer a sustainable solution. So these nature-based solutions are perhaps the focal points that I'm able to work on. Right now, there are many city councils like Malaga and Murcia that are creating specific guidelines to apply these nature-based solutions. These are very location-specific solutions that will be very different in different cities, but they will allow for happy and healthy cities, cities that use water in a sustainable way, and this is particularly important for island archipelagos, cities with a lot of nature, and resilient and prosperous cities. So, how can we apply all of this to Santa Cruz? Well, in Spain, there are lots of different publications that can serve as inspiration. For instance, this one from Galicia, or the report on sustainability, which was published in December 2024, which has a chapter about greening. You can download this on the internet. In Spain, right now, there are a series of places that are writing up green infrastructure plans and implementing nature-based solutions for their particular problems. Santa Cruz is unique. Most of the urbanism is located at under 400 meters in altitude. And this is good because at 400 meters in altitude, there will be less effects of all of these problems. In the coming decades, we're expecting 0.09 degree Celsius temperature increase. But that's an average. Of course, these increases will be different depending on the orientation, altitude, etc. So the microclimate study of different projects that we put in place in Santa Cruz is going to be key. Then there are a whole host of very positive aspects to bear in mind. 45% of the island is protected, 82% is natural, our natural spaces. It's the third municipality in Spain with most natural territory. And Naga is a fascinating area with the greatest amount of endemic species per kilometer square in Europe. We have many endemic species from Micronesia. I think around 15 million euros have been invested from European funds. So lots of green spaces, but not all over the island. And there's no connectivity between these spaces. So we're lacking in green infrastructure. So we have a very fragmented urban landscape. These green spaces that we have in Santa Cruz sit alongside other spaces that are empty, that have no particular purpose. And Gis Clemon also talks about this idea of the third landscape, these pieces of land that are awaiting development. So we can use some of these spaces to improve connectivity. We're talking about here protective areas around ravines. These ravines are potentially very useful spaces to improve our ecological connectivity in the city and to connect visually the sea with the mountains. These represent a solution at a psychological, social level and as well ecological. I have 5 minutes left. I maybe get the extra 2 minutes that John didn't use as well. So we need to work on these water corridors, these coastal corridors and these green corridors. So we have solutions and space available. I think soon we will see a presentation about the green structure in Santa Cruz, which will look more specifically at these things. So in summary, I can work with vegetation, water, and the soil to be able to offer a green strategic planning for Santa Cruz. We mustn't forget that we often use this green perspective in isolation, but it should be complementary. We need to also think about policies that reduce contamination. We need to work as well with policies that mitigate climate change. Green infrastructure has another complementary role, not alternative role, for those policies that address contamination. We need to keep our minds wide open and think globally, or think at island level at least, when we find these nature-based solutions for these very complex urban spaces and integrate lots of different solutions based on nature. What's Santa Cruz doing then? Well, we've seen there are lots of different plans, studies, the value of the urban forest, in green infrastructure, emergency plans. Of course, we should look at how these plans are interconnected, and we need to introduce or write guidelines to introduce private funding in this green infrastructure. So, to some extent, we need to be working on governance as well. For this to happen, well, we need to measure things in order to prove that they've been happening, and our measurements need to be science-based. So rather than looking at the number of trees per person in a city, we should rather be looking at the canopy surface that these trees occupy. We also need to include these indicators, these metrics, as a way of bringing nature into our cities. Botanic selection traditionally was based on how pretty the plants were, but now we need to think about ecosystems, plants that sit well next to others or don't. We need to think about urban planning as well. We need to talk about the amounts of surface area that these tree canopies occupy, biomechanic criteria, and yes, the traditional and aesthetics of these plants. So we need to change our mindset, not work in a 2D level, but rather 3D or 4D. This spatial interconnectivity is something that needs to be analyzed in a 3D way. Everything that's linked to an urban landscape is affected by the perception of it. Landscape is defined as a percentage of the land that is perceived by people. We often don't perceive a lot of the thinking that's gone into these landscapes. Robertson Davis said, "The eye only sees what it's ready to understand," and so we need to educate people about why we're making the decisions that we're making. I live in A Coruña, and we're going through a similar process to that which is happening here. We have a surface area of 500,000 kilometers squared. We have a port area, and we are having the same debates. We're talking about recovering land from the port to create a new urbanism. We all know that this is a great opportunity for both of us. More surface area, improved accessibility, etc. But I would like to now briefly highlight a few key ideas that may serve for inspiration here in Santa Cruz. The first is to do with identity. The coast is the best antidote to generic urban development. We need to think about how these areas look like in the past. Then, green infrastructure. Third, optimize ecosystem services and use nature to our advantage. Fourth, resilience, working with all different types of professionals from different backgrounds. Five, longitudinal and transversal or horizontal connectivity. This is key in urban design. Public health, we've talked about this, adaptive strategy, and finally, participation and governance. Without governance, of course, we won't find the best solution. So 8 key concepts that you may want to take into account in your decision making. I chose this quote from Emerson. Nature always wears the colors of our spirits. So institutions should no longer be the shadows of people. Those that are in charge of these institutions should be working with the same goal, a better future for Santa Cruz. Thank you.